So I'll be completely honest. I do not know how to start this video. I was thinking of all the TED Talks and how they start. It's always with this interesting story that's captivating for the audience. And the topic that we are going to venture in today, I honestly do not have an engaging story. But I do have a realization, which is I think the reason why it's so hard for me to start is because I reflect on what a time you and I are living. Being in quarantine, going through a pandemic, surviving Zoom University, not having the experiences that we wished for, whether it was graduation, whether it was seeing that our loved ones couldn't have a graduation, having a quarantine birthday, which I did. I'm a May baby. I'm a Taurus. And then to follow that up with the civil unrest that happened because of the injustice that we saw unfold early March with the murder of George Floyd, and then proceeding with the news of the sentence of the police officers with Breonna Taylor. Man, there are no words. And so when we think about, well, what does this all have to do with social justice, finding your voice in the workplace? As a person who grew up taking internships, figuring out what I really wanted to do and learning from people, this is the first time I've ever seen companies go out and say, this is our work too. This is not just a place where you leave politics and religion off the table. That work is work. I've never seen such an impact of so many companies that are saying enough is enough. And I think that's why this video is, I think, one of the most intriguing ones I've ever done, because this realization that there is hope, that there is change coming. And a lot of it comes from you. Completely honest here. It comes from you. From this generation that is saying this is not enough. You all are pushing companies to say that their work is not just to create products and services, but how are they engaging with the community around them? And more importantly, how are they doing the work around social justice? And so today in this video, you're going to find 3 ways that if you're interested and you're like, Rosa, I'm already doing the great work, but maybe one of my concerns is would that work stop if I go to work for a company? And I'm here to tell you that there is hope, because there's so many companies that are opening these dialogues, these conversations, and more importantly, they want to be held accountable to the work that they promised to do. And so this video is really going to cover 3 ways that not only can you identify those companies and spaces to grow in, but also practical ways for you to continue to develop your voice, not only as a leader, but as a leader that is grounded and oriented towards social justice. So stay tuned as we cover the top 3 tips and ways for you to find your social justice voice in the workplace. So one of my very first tips that I would give is research companies that are doing the work around social justice, equity, diversity. This is really a great example with Levi Jeans. And just if you look them up on LinkedIn, you can see just what are the efforts around their employees, right? So there's examples of them giving the day off for Thanksgiving, how they're really encouraging their employees to vote, and then also like even providing structure for to fight against structural inequalities. So this is a really great example of a company that is not only using the language, but also like really trying to tie it in with who they are as a company. So I highly encourage students to look at pages like Who We Are, right? The mission statement. Like you can already see a company that is built with a commitment and a culture to be part of like the community, right? And so you see that I'm clicking through some of the efforts, but here you see being a force for positive change in our community. So just imagine that's what they believe in, right? They have things like social impact and diversity and inclusion. And you can even see just on their pages, like these are important words to them. They have a whole section about like how important they feel this all is. And so they want to welcome people to feel empowered and welcome to be their authentic selves. So this is the type of research you want to do to just put yourself in spaces that have an ability to manifest this kind of work for you to witness. So here's another example from Nike, and you get to see an example of their posts of how they're committed to actionable and impactful change to end systematic racism against Black people and all people of color. So you get to see again, how are these companies really trying to engage with the work, right? With social justice. So again, this is the type of stuff you want to be looking for in these companies, right? Especially like LinkedIn, which is so accessible. You can look at the posts that they're creating, especially in moments of like civil unrest, right? Here's another example of just like how they're continuing to work with caring about the community, right? They're talking about how they donated especially to the recent fires in Oregon, right? And so Nike, again, they encourage all their employees to volunteer and support communities where they live and work. So you're getting examples of companies that really support this type of work, right? You get to see that they hire for interns. So again, that's definitely, if you're interested in Nike, definitely a company to research. You also see examples here of International Day of the Girl, right? And this is obviously an older post, but again, they're looking at how are they supporting young women to stay in sports, right? To invest, have positive play experiences, and inviting young women to become role models, right? So again, here's another company that is talking about the work that still needs to be done. So again, my number one tip is just to continue to find these companies that are supporting these types of efforts. So here's another example from Nike, and you get to see an example of their posts of how they're. So my second tip is to observe peers and leaders when they're talking about social justice issues, right? So, imagine yourself, you're in the space of, an internship, maybe it's your first internship or it's your first job coming out of college. And you really want to engage in manifesting this voice and developing it, making it your own, but you're like, okay, so how do I say it, right? How do I, provide, a voice to the voiceless, right? Or people who, we have like said, we need to raise their voices. It's there, but we need to uplift them. We need to amplify them. We need to bring recognition. So how do we do that, right? How do we start learning how to say it, right? And that's, I think, the number one thing I hear from students all the time, like, ooh, Rosa, you're really good at saying things and crafting like statements and stuff like that. And one, I do always say, well, I did get in, I was an English major, so I was exposed to a lot of literature within 7 years. But the other thing is, like, I think I was very fortunate that I was always around leaders that talked about social justice. And one of the best, influences that I had, I think, came from, like, leaders that would pose questions out of curiosity to explore issues. So instead of, like, pointing out people and not knowing how to say things, they would invite them to think about these things a lot deeper. And so I remember that particularly happened in the classroom when I was in my master's degree. And I honestly, to be honest with you, I don't remember the conversation, but I do remember how impressed I was that my professor, knowing that the statement was a little problematic, phrased it as like, thank you for like bringing that up. It also, to me, it also invites us to think about blank. And I remember that phrase so much because one, it felt so gentle, but it wasn't calling the student out. It was really inviting her in to like continue the conversation. And I remember at that moment, I was like, I want to do that. I want to make other people feel that, yes, this is hard because we're all learning and we may not know everybody else's like multiple identities and how to support as an ally, but I want to engage and build community. Like, how do I do that in the social justice lens, right? And so when you are in internship spaces, right, especially if you followed my tip number 1, you land in a company that really values this type of work. The second tip for you is to really listen and observe to the leaders that are doing the work, right? How are they communicating these efforts with people who think very differently, right? How are they communicating and engaging with identities that they're an ally to, right? Maybe they don't identify with the community, but they are a huge ally and supporter. So how did they develop that, right? So coming in consciously saying, I want to observe what that looks like, is going to really help you pick up here and there phrases and moments that are just going to build in that toolkit of yours, right? But the other thing I would also mention is like your peers are super important in this, like not just your fellow interns and fellow colleagues in the future, but think of this in the classroom setting. There's so many of you that have so many rich like histories and like stories and information that you, like all of you, can actually help each other in these conversations. So let the classroom and like student clubs, let that be your arena to practice, right? Maybe it's a phrase you heard, maybe it's something you read and you want to bring it to the table. Practice. This is one of those spaces where if you are still learning, that's perfectly fine, right? So take advantage of the classroom, take advantage of like boards, like look at how things are written. Like all of these are spaces for you to practice in. So that's my second tip, like observe peers and leaders when they're talking about social justice issues. All right, and my last tip, this would be keep on learning, right? So, we're still in the space of learning, not just about how to advocate for the identities we identify with, right? But also being a great ally to the communities that we may not identify with, but we know we want to support, not just have to, but that we want to support, right? And so I provided these images for you to kind of like think about, like part of like continuing to learn. Yes, it's about reading. It's about, really thinking about like, okay, what are some like communities that I want to support that I may not know a lot of, right? Or maybe our own identity, right? Like I identify as Latina. So when I was in college, especially being an English major, I didn't read literature that was like Latinx. I didn't take a class. On the contrary, I took all these like 18th century British and American lit, got very few like authors of color that I read, right? So I did not grow up like maybe someone who studied like Africana studies, or who studied like Chicana studies, right? That may have immersed themselves in more history. So I had to learn more about my identity, right? And so part of like the homework around social justice and being that leader and like developing your voice is reading more about it, right? There's so many resources, and it really reminds me of like I recently did the career insights workshop for our LGBTQ students, and I remember feeling super nervous because I don't identify within the LGBTQ plus community, but I was so invested in being an ally and saying, okay, I want to do the work. I want to make sure I understand what is the terminology, what is the data around that in intersectionality with the workforce, right? And so I dived into a lot of literature and researching and Googling and doing all this stuff, right? And so that's what I mean. Like, you want to do the homework, right? Whether it's for the identities you are identifying right now, right? Or if it's for, social justice issues that you just want to learn more about, right? And so that's doing the work. But the other component that I highly, highly encourage is that not only do you have to research and read, but there has to be some sort of dialogue, and it has to be some sort of like discussion around what you're learning, right? So like, I'll give you an example. I along with a couple of colleagues that now I call my friends, we started a collective called Mujeres Profesionales. And so our collective is really all about, like, how do we create spaces for women who identify as Latinx, and how do we support them as they become first generation professionals. And so a lot of the things that I thought I knew about being Latina and being a first gen professional were challenged by my other, like, colleagues now that I call friends, right? And so a lot of our conversations were about, like, well, how do we define first gen? How do we define Latina? How, like, do we want to do this? Like, well, when you say that, it really is like dismissing this other group. And so we would dive into these amazing conversations, but always with the respect of, like, if we said a term that maybe was not appropriate or maybe is not inclusive, that we not called each other out, but we called each other in, right? To say, like, oh, actually, you don't want to use that term because it actually has this negative connotation, right? And because we built that trust, we were able to kind of say, you know what, thank you so much for pointing it out, right? So again, tip number 3 is read and discuss issues around social justice, right? Again, this is you engaging with the work, right? So not just in the classroom setting, not just like in these other spaces, but also, like, again, if you're practicing it outside when you come to the workforce as an intern, as like a first-time employee, as a first-generation professional, right? That you're creating this new space for yourself and for others, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable in phrasing some of these things or bringing up some of these issues because you've practiced with so many other people. So that's my tip number 3. Just read and discuss issues about social justice. All right. And before we end, obviously, I had disclosed I'm an English major, so I could not leave you without a quote. And this quote comes from Cecilia Munoz from her book, More Than Ready. And I just recently am reading this book, and I was so tearing up because I feel that this quote really identifies not only with this topic, but I think being the first, right? So whether the first in our families to attend college, enter a traditional workforce, or embark on a non-traditional path, we have forged new roads, often without the role models of our own, because we had no other choice. There was nobody that looked like us or who grew up like us talking on these roles before we did. Our stories have rarely not been written because they're still unfolding. And so I really loved this quote and wanted to share this for you as we're closing this this quick mini TED Talk, because one, a lot of you may feel that your voice is still not forming and you feel like, where do I start? But I just want to remind you that you're probably the first in your family to advocate for this, right? Or the first to, like, explore this in your own way, right? Maybe you do have relatives, you do have people in your lives that have done social justice work, but now it's your turn, right? And so again, not a lot of us have these models, and so our stories are still unfolding, and I definitely wanted to share that with all of you before we conclude our little talk here. And finally, I do want to end with some words of my own. So one, I do want to thank you for watching this video. This was something that I definitely wanted to present to all of you, our emerging leaders, because I think it's work that you are naturally doing in being leaders and immersing yourself in advocating for social justice. And so I do want to end with a quick story and an interesting bit of homework. So I know, don't worry, it's not a lot. I know you all have so many assignments, so don't worry, it's not a lot. It's very quick. But the story I wanted to share before I part with you is when I was leaving Cal State Dominguez Hills, I was working as like an English supplemental instructor. And I remember that I was gonna do my second master's, which I know is crazy, but I was working on a second master's, and I was gonna kind of invest myself more in the career development center. And I remember my students telling me that I was abandoning them, and that was very hard to hear because one, I knew why they were saying it. They came from schools, from high schools that really told them that they would never graduate, that college was not an option for them, that that they should just follow the statistics, the narrative of their identity. And so when when it was time to leave, you know, they had given me this very humble, and I still keep it to this day, this very humble frame. Well, I framed it, but it was a piece of paper, just computer paper, and they all written like their goodbyes and what they loved about my class. But there was this one comment, and I swear it still stays with me. This student had written that it was a pleasure to be in my class, and she said, "Please don't forget about us." And I say this story because a lot of the work that you'll do around social justice as a leader comes a lot from remembering. It's and not forgetting, right? And so many of us come from families where we did not have a lot, that we struggled with getting food on the table, that we saw our parents work almost 24/7 to provide for us, that we you know, we probably will always remember the time where we had to choose our family because maybe our biological family wasn't there. Some of us may remember what it feels like to be followed in a store. Some of us can never forget, right? Seeing our own parents and loved ones being discriminated. So a lot of the work that we do as leaders really comes from not forgetting. So the activity I invite you to do, and you can write it on a sticky note, you can think about it and put it into the universe, but the question I have for you is, who do you not want to forget? What don't you want to forget as you move as a leader? What's going to keep you grounded as a leader? Because at the end of the day, when you're doing the work that you're doing, right? Social justice oriented, thinking about those communities that we still need to amplify and uplift and seek justice for. There are going to be moments where you're going to feel so tired and so not understanding why the process is not working and why aren't things changing fast enough, right? But when you remember why you are doing what you're doing, you're going to feel so grounded. And so I invite you to answer that one question. I know I threw three, but what don't you want to forget? What don't you want to forget? Because at the core, at the very, very center of who you are and when you're doing this work, that's what's going to keep you going. And that's what's going to drive that social justice voice to be sharpened, to grow, to be elevated, to seek new paths, right? So that's what I want to end with you today. Myself and the Career Development Center, we are so honored to stand alongside you as emerging leaders to do the good work, to continue to do the good work. And when we need each other because we feel tired, we feel like nothing is working, that we're going to lean on each other in the work that we do. We're going to continue the good fight. So with that said, thank you again for seeing this video. And if there's anything you ever need, please feel free to reach out to our center and to myself. I am more than happy to be a person that you can lean on and to continue this amazing work. So until next time, bye.